We'll look at this notion of the human person as receptive to God and revelation through one more lens. And we'll take as our starting point the Catechism of the Catholic Church when it talks about the human person's capacity for God. And it tells us, the first thing it talks about is the desire for God, that we have an inbuilt desire for God. Now, if that's the case, that stands as a pretty clear instance of our openness or receptivity to God and His revelation. If the human person has an inbuilt or hardwired desire for God, then it's quite clear how the human person could expect, in a sense, or seek out or be looking for God to reveal Himself. So all of this information is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It says the desire for God is written in the human heart, because man is created by God and for God. So it first takes us to our origin and to our end. It's in virtue of where we come from and what we're ultimately destined for that the Catechism can say we have this natural desire for God. It's written on the human heart. That means there isn't a person who doesn't have, in some sense, this built-in longing for God. And God, it says, God never ceases to draw man to Himself. Only in God will he find the truth and happiness he never stops searching for. And notice again, with all of these videos that we've talked about up to this point, it can be rooted again in the human person created in the image and likeness of God with intellect and will. We seek truth and happiness. That's part of who we are. The idea here is that that intellect and will is ordered towards God as its final fulfillment. I don't want just some truth or some limited truth. The human person has an appetite for ultimate truth or absolute truth, and not just any goodness or any particular good thing, but we have an appetite for ultimate goodness, for true absolute goodness. And the same goes for happiness. We don't wake up one day and say, I've had my fair share of happiness. No. The human person seems to have an unquenchable thirst for infinite happiness. The idea here is those are markers or signposts or clues that we have this inbuilt desire not for any particular truth or goodness or happiness, but for God Himself, who is the fullness of truth, happiness, and goodness. And it goes on to say that the dignity of man rests above all on the fact that he is called to communion with God. Right, to this intimate relationship of life and love. That's what we're created for. This invitation to converse with God is addressed to man as soon as he comes into being, right, from the moment of creation. For if man exists, it is because God has created him through love, and through love continues to hold him in existence. This is a really incredible thing to consider, that from all eternity, and out of a sheer motive of love and goodness, from all eternity, God planned each one of us individually. And He planned each one of us individually to manifest some particular aspect of His infinite goodness and infinite love into the universe. So that we've been loved into existence by our Creator. It goes on to say, he cannot, this is the human person, cannot live fully according to truth unless he freely acknowledges that love and entrusts himself to his Creator. That is to say, if we truly were created by love for love, that is created from God's hand for this communion with God, then to live other than that is not to live the truth of our being. And to not love to not live according to the truth of our being would result in ultimate frustration and despair. And again, the idea here is that built into the human person then is this longing for this ultimate truth of our being. And so it says, in many ways throughout history down to the present day, men have given expression to their quest for God in their religious beliefs and behaviors, in their prayers, sacrifices, rituals, meditations, and so forth. So this is talking about all human religions throughout time, and all of these actions of those religions have been the human person seeking after God. It's another signpost or clue that we have this inbuilt desire for God. It says these forms of religious expression, despite the ambiguities they often bring with them, are so universal that one may well call man a religious being. So not only do we have, as the previous videos talked about, the suffering human or the questioning human or the historical human, or the symbolic human, but now it's suggesting we are by nature a religious being. We're a religious human. We seek God because that desire is built into us. We, though, can flee our desire for God. This is just clear from experience. Even though we all have this inbuilt desire for God, we're able to silence it. The Catechism says, but this intimate and vital bond of man to God can be forgotten, overlooked, and even explicitly rejected by man. Such attitudes can have different causes. It names revolt against evil in the world, religious ignorance or indifference, the cares and riches of this world, the scandal of bad example on the part of believers, currents of thought hostile to religion, finally, that attitude of sinful man which makes him hide from God out of fear and flee his call. So the Catechism is rather realistic here, though, that even though we have this inbuilt desire as coming from God and made for communion with God, not all people embrace that desire, and some actually silence it. And then it ends here on a note of hope with the idea that, there we go, that God never ceases to call us. Even as we flee from his call, man can forget God or reject him. He never ceases to call every man to seek him, and so as to find life and happiness. But this search for God demands of man every effort of intellect, a sound will, an upright heart, as well as the witness of others who teach him to seek God. And so we can end with the words of St. Augustine here in his Confessions, which spoke about this, this receptivity or openness to God, in this inbuilt desire for God. And he prays, "You are great, O Lord, and greatly to be praised. Great is your power and your wisdom. Your wisdom is without measure. And man, so small a part of your creation, wants to praise you. This man, though clothed with mortality, and bearing the evidence of sin and the proof that you withstand the proud. Despite everything, man, though but a small part of your creation, wants to praise you. You yourself encourage him to delight in your praise, for you have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." Perhaps the most famous line of Augustine, "You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." So you put all these things together from these 3 videos, ending with the words of St. Augustine here, and it does seem that the human person, unlike the squirrel we opened with, there's something unique about the human person, created in the image and likeness of God, with intellect and will, that the human person stands open or receptive to God's revelation, to knowledge of God in a way that the rest of visible creation doesn't. And that's why humans, among all visible creation, are the theologians. The squirrel is not a theologian because the squirrel doesn't have this ability to know its creator. It's not called to enter into communion with its creator, and it doesn't have an intellect that is able to reflect upon the work of its creator. And so that's how we'll transition into the topic of theology, of the 2 orders of knowledge about God, both the rational, philosophical mode to know God, as well as that which is theology, where we reflect upon God's revelation.